When someone comes to you and says, hey, I got this update of The Breakfast Club I want to do, what goes through your head then?
All the stakes for the kids in our new film, which is The Class, are really, modern day. These are really powerful themes. So some of the characters are dealing with alcoholism. Some of them are dealing with violence at home. Some of them are dealing with life-threatening disease. One of them is dealing with their own sexuality and sort of coming out. So there's a wide range of really interesting and dynamic themes here that come to life in the screenplay. So I was really impressed with Nikki's writing, inspired by, I think, the structure of what John Hughes created all those years ago. But I think in many ways takes it even further. So I'm really proud of the result. I think our cast did a great job. We have a bunch of really talented young actors that have done a great job here. So.
Any hesitance? I mean, the thing about creating a masterpiece like The Breakfast Club, or even like baking a really good cake, is when you try to change an ingredient, it might turn out great, but it can be a scary endeavor, right? To take on something with a legacy like The Breakfast Club.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Listen, I had no anticipation of ever, doing a remake or even a film inspired by an earlier film. I mean, I had the great pleasure and privilege of working with John Hughes as a kid. But with this, I felt where he really reminded me of John is there's great character for conflict. And I think that's a sort of a universal lesson, whether it's a great drama or comedy, you need that conflict. But I think in the tradition of Hughes, too, he really gets to the audience and he gets to the heart with his writing through the humor. So all these characters really exhibit that. There's great cathartic moments where they really kind of give each other a break and they're really struggling with real world hardcore issues. So in many ways, that's reflective and reminiscent of the original film. We're really happy with the results because there's a lot of great performances and also the humor really cuts through, which is really important, I think, to reach any audience.
The role you have is interesting in this one, to go from one of the students in the classroom in the original Breakfast Club. And of course, in the original Breakfast Club, the principal was played by the late great Paul Gleason, who I know was a friend of yours. But he played sort of the prototypical jerk authority figure, and your character sort of serves the same function. I wonder if you could compare how but it is different. So I wonder if you could compare a little bit about how your character compares to the Mr. Vernon of the original.
No, it's a great question, Tom. Paul Gleason was a great guy. We generally became friends after working together on The Breakfast Club. And then we did another film a couple years after that called Johnny Be Good, which was a goofy film. But I think what makes it different with Principal Falk is that there's a turn that happens, because he's kind of a hard ass and he's tough on the kids and he's really kind of, the bad cop and the good cop, bad cop relationship that, these two teachers represent to the kids. So Debbie is really like the drama teacher and who really is kind of mothering the kids and encouraging them to come out of their shells and et cetera. But there's a nice turn that Falk makes because towards the end of the film, he has to encourage Hannah Keppel's character. And she's got a voice and a good one. And he gives her the kind of, music class acoustic from school. And he says, keep the guitar and you got to keep working on your gift. So you get a nice sense that with that connection and just also how the kids leave the principal feeling by the end of the day, that he's really kind of softened up in a way. He's kind of they've helped humanize him, because you get a sense that this is a guy that might have just stayed in his own world, in his own neighborhood, and, just felt like he was relegated to become a teacher after high school. We all know people like that kind of stay close to home,
yeah,
and they're from where they're from, and that's to be respected. So it was really interesting. So by contrast, I think this character, Nikki, gave us some really nice moments where for both Debbie and I, where we really, we come to grips with what the kids have learned and how they've grown in the course of that day. And at the same time, they make a nice turn too, character-wise, which shows a kind of a deeper humanity in the two teachers, which I think was a great touch.
First of all, I love that you were not just acting in the original, but you were also apparently casting directing when you were like 16 years old and finding actors for The Breakfast Club.
Yeah, it's just a tribute to John Hughes because he was cool like that. I just felt that comfort with him right away, Tom. It was amazing. Even though all those years ago, it was, he was 35 and I was just this 15-year-old kid. It actually started on 16 Candles when he told me he wanted me to cast my two buddies. So I wound up helping him cast, John Cusack and Darren, who were my buddies in that film. But yeah, I just had that level of comfort and trust with him, even though I was a kid. And that was an amazing thing about John, that I did feel that comfort, to be able to share ideas with him creatively, not just about my own characters or whatever. So he was great.
And I want to follow up on the Debbie part of what you just said. Just take a listen to this.
This class lacks discipline. I'd say fail the whole bunch and call it a day.
Just let me do my thing.
I call that hand-holding.
I call that teaching.
And that last scene we played there, it was with Debbie, who you mentioned there, which is another icon of the era of the 80s. Debbie Gibson, who's playing the drama teacher, and you're sort of more of the hardline townie, doesn't want any hand holding with the classes, and then she's more of like the fun, free drama teacher. Let's listen to people's feelings. Now, my job is to sort of overthink these things, but there was some meaning to me in these two 80s kids trying to figure out how to handle the 2022 kids, you know?
Interesting. Yeah, that would be an appropriate question for a writer-director. I thought it was a cool idea when he brought Debbie to my attention, but then when I met her, she's got this real warmth. I think I really connect with her because we're both from the New York area, but she really was a great choice, I think. And her acting was really flawless, I thought, very natural and believable. And the other thing too, which is a rarity, and it's not always there in actors, is a certain likability that she has. So I thought she did a great job in this role. And, true to form, as in life, just like it was art reflecting life in a way, she felt that way towards those kids. She really bonded with them. She's actually done a lot of teaching and worked at summer camps and coached and trained and taught, so she had a real sort of entry point and emotional connection to that aspect of it, of being a good teacher, being someone who could really help shift the course of their future.
Could you relate to one another? Because you were both, that big burst of fame, which I want to talk about in a second, happened in a time that's so removed from when any of the kids in this class would be experiencing that right now. So in a time before Instagram, a time of a monoculture where the MTV and newspapers and People magazine were focusing on 20 or 30 people in America. And they were, but you and Debbie were two of them at the same time. Could you relate to one another on that?
It's really funny. Your comments are very interesting, but also reminded me of a funny meme I saw recently, which was ironically about the Breakfast Club. And it had the picture of the five of us from the poster. And it said, if this movie was made today, it wouldn't work because all these kids would be on smartphones and no one would be talking to each other. I thought that's really funny. It's also kind of a sad reality of our life, that technology, I just think the world is a faster moving place. And I think due to tech and socials and everything else, I think it sort of exacerbated all that and magnified it. So I think from that standpoint, absolutely, but by the same token, I think this younger generation is in many ways much more emotionally developed than my generation was. And at the same time, hipper, really sort of encouraging and supportive of each other. So I see a lot in this new generation of people in the world that is really impressive. So, and again, true to form, these young actors all had that, they really were genuinely encouraging and supportive of each other. They genuinely became friends during the making of the film, which was awesome. And a real bonus for us as producers. I was really impressed and really happy. I just kind of stood back and watched what they were doing, and the level of focus and heart that they approached it with was really great. It's really impressive.
That's so great. And that modernization you mentioned is so apparent in the film, while also still capturing the moments from the original film that made it sort of timeless. And I want to talk about one of those moments now. Just take a listen to this.
I can't have an F. I can't have it. I know my parents can have it. Even if I ace the rest of the semester, I'm still only a B. Everything's ruined for me.
I want to talk about the timelessness of this scene because our producer of this segment, Jen, who's across from the glass from me right now, she watched this scene with her 13-year-old son a few months ago. So 13 years old, wasn't even a glint in the eye, as they say, when the original one came out. And he was so affected by that scene. And when I went to watch it on the way in, I was still so affected by that scene. What do you remember from shooting that scene?
The themes that John wrote, and addressed, powerful, the idea of being acceptance, feeling like an outsider, even in your own family, wanting to belong, wanting to understand your own sexuality. All these things that develop in all of us as human beings, he was able to capture that. It's almost like group therapy. People either conscious or unconsciously start projecting and relating to one or more of the characters in the Breakfast Club. And I think that's why the film was held up, for those reasons, that it kind of is a deconstruction of stereotypes. And at the same time, there's some great and powerful messages that, that the audience can glean from that film. And we tried to take the best of that and sort of apply it to the class.
What I find amazing about that is that the impact can be so different than the actual event itself. Like, because to you, I'm sure, when you think back to the moment of doing that scene, what were you? You were just sitting in a chair with a camera pointed at you, right? A kid.
Literally. And in that era, it was so interesting. You just triggered another memory, which was, this is before Video Village and everybody having a monitor and everyone sitting around the monitor. John would literally sit like next to the camera. It would be the camera operator, the focus puller, and John would be on the floor next to us. So all those scenes where we're shooting and all of us are sitting on our rear ends in the back of the library, John would be right there next to camera, and he would really be your first audience, and he would champion you through it, and if he had an idea or an inkling of something to try, he would just give you a line reading or throw something at you. So his connection to the work was always great. And it was always right there. And he was always so accessible to us. He was always willing to interact with us and discuss it. And again, he had such a natural talent as a writer that it also freed him up because, he was not precious about it. He would allow us to try things and to invent things and to come up with stuff or ad lib. And if he thought it could work, we would do 2 or 3 takes for John, and then we would do a couple with a new idea or whatever else might have developed. So he was always trying to make things better. It was just that sense of fun with him. He was just great. And he was so open, Tom, that the process was great, and he really spoiled me because all these years later, I've been an actor now 46 years, I'm 54, So I was working for almost 10 years as a little kid before I even met John. Yeah. But it really spoiled me because he became like my best friend. It was just a great working experience. And again, what he gave me, he gave to so many of us, that kind of accessibility and that openness and just that kind of goodwill, that good spirit, while we were making the work. It was great.
How are you for watching it back now? I mean, for a bunch of reasons. One is that because, obviously you're in it, so you see your younger self, and that would stress me out. But also, I'm reminded of that. I'm sure you read it, that essay that Molly Ringwald wrote a few years ago for The New Yorker, where she talked about how, she believes in the film and she thinks the film deserves to be, in the canon of some of the greatest films of all time. However, when she watched it back with her daughter, she couldn't help but notice, racism, sexism, homophobia, the very nuanced, as you said, actually on the introduction, like it was of its time. How do you feel when you watch these films back now?
Well, I think if people can look at the film and appreciate it in the context of time, I think that's important. I think overall his work has great impact because I think he achieved those things that we kind of addressed, which was kind of the sometimes forgotten humanity of childhood and that evolution as we go from children to adults, and that's a very personal thing. It's also very awkward and funny and, life affirming and scary thing too, right? So I think he was able to tap into all those real emotions. So I think, when I look back again, we don't want to be offensive to anybody, but it's a different world. Yeah. But I think in the spirit of good humor, he had the best of intentions in terms of creating characters that people could relate to and love, hopefully.
You must have felt that way with the teenagers in this film. You must have thought, my God, we were so different back then than they are now,
Yeah, because I'll be very honest, Tom, I think this younger generation in many ways is much more progressive in terms of just accepting of each other and socially aware and conscious. And a lot of great things can be said about this young millennial generation. I was taking notes across the board, just seeing their level of commitment at the same time, seeing things with fresh eyes, seeing what it meant to them to be a part of something that hopefully would, to reach people in a similar way as the original. So everybody brought it. I was really excited to see.
How was the SNL thing for you? How was the SNL thing? Because that was an interesting time. You're what? You're like, how old are you when you're on Saturday Night Live? 17?
17, yeah. And I get the call that Lauren wants me to join the cast. And I was flipped out. Obviously Lauren's a legend and a Canadian legend. So I got the call and I accepted the job. And then I just remember freaking out because for the next couple of months, I was like, I can't believe I'm part of this. It was like a dream come true. Because the normal trajectory for people is they come out of Second City or the Groundlings or great improv groups. And, I didn't have any background as a stand-up comic or any of that stuff. So I was super honored to get the call from Lauren, super excited. And one great memory I have is before we started, another great Canadian, Dan Aykroyd, he was hosting a party for the Best of Aykroyd, which was being released by Lauren's company, Broadway Video. And Aykroyd was so awesome. And again, one of my heroes growing up. I love the Blues Brothers and everything he did. I thought he was one of the most brilliant SNL cast members. But he pulled Downey and I aside, and I remember him giving us a sense. It was like he was giving us a pep talk about how it would be working on SNL. And he's like, man, you guys are going to love it. There's an audience there, and you're going to feel the beam of the 3 cameras, when that light hits you, and you're going out to the whole country, but then you're going to have the energy of the audience there at 30 Rock. It was incredible training ground, because it's like theater, rock and roll, stand up, everything kind of rolled into one. So there were so many great people I got to work with and write with, and just being a part of the show was really special, So I'm grateful for that.
Again, I still can't get over being 17 and having three. Because I think when I was 17, I was trying to figure out if I could buy Doritos. You know what I mean? Like if I had enough money to buy Doritos, and you were like, well, I'm trying to understand the pressure of a heritage like Saturday Night Live, while also trying to bring myself to it.
Not available at Tim Hortons, I guess.
Yeah. Very, nice. Very good. You can't. I was trying to figure out how to get a double at Tim Hortons, and you were trying to figure out how to resurrect a NBC legacy. Just a couple of the ways, But in all seriousness, on that, like you end up, having this other career, like you went on to do Edward Scissorhands and 6 Degrees of Separation and the Dead Zone series. Just to name a few. And maybe I'm wrong by seeing it as 2 careers, like the young career and the adult career. Was there a deliberate transition for you?
Well, to be very honest, I hit some challenging times in my 20s. I was going through some stuff, and I had to really kind of regroup and kind of, really sit with myself and figure out if this was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it turns out that that was never really in question. I just really wanted to keep going. And with the opportunities that Harold Ramis and John Hughes had given me, really keep going with my career and develop myself. So yeah, there were some really powerful kind of transition times in my life where I had to kind of rebuild. And that happened in my early 20s. So I really had to kind of reinvest. And at that point, I started working with some acting coaches, and I really made a decision that this was going to be a life choice and that this would be my career and my work. And so I just kind of, reset myself in a way and decided, I'm going to keep moving ahead and keep rocking. But there were a lot of challenging times, certainly in my 20s, where it was difficult to get work because of the early impressions or impact that I'd made with these films with John and all that. So that was, really interesting and challenging. But in learning what I've learned all these years, I'm really glad I made that commitment to myself, because, there's no guarantee of anything. So you kind of go on hand to mouth every month as an actor. You never know what's ahead of you. But again, those are really character building and character defining times that we all have and have gleaned lessons from in life, So I think that challenge of kind of not knowing if it was going to work or dealing with unemployment, to be very honest, in my early 20s, it just forced me to really dig deep, and then I just kept going. So thank God for that I've been able to endure. And I just kind of had a hard head about it. I realized I want to just be tenacious and to build a career.
I can tell you never took it for granted. And I can also I hope you don't mind me saying this, I get a great sense of gratitude from you, a great sense of peace from you. I have talked to people, and I'm not going to say any names, but you know who they are too, who, if someone was to come up to them and talk to them about some success they had when they were 15 or 16, they might recoil from it, or they might avoid it, or they might get a little pissed off about it. You don't seem, I can tell there's either been some work or some good perspective on how to, that's not easy.
I appreciate that. Well, definitely, Tom. Here I sit at 54. So there have been many lessons that I've attributed and can be attributed to what I've learned in the industry, but it certainly is humbling, and you just want to have a positive outlook. So that's something that, that kind of self-work and that commitment to yourself is really important, no matter what your career is. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I do have a sense of peace about it, because I'm grateful for all the experiences. And I think that's something that's really important, that whenever, you feel down, just to kind of drop into gratitude. Yeah. So I'm always truly grateful for, the career I've had, to have a long run, to be able to be working for this amount of time, and then to have been a part of films that really kind of resonate and hit home for people. It's a real blessing.
That's such a beautiful way to think about these things, and a beautiful way to think about bringing this story back to audiences in this new way. Lovely to get a chance to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. Great being with you. Thank you for the time, man.
Lovely being with you too. Anthony Michael Hall is starring in the new movie, The Class. It is out now.